G'day, g'day, g'day. How are we all? Pretty sure we're live today without too much of a hitch. Few things, not a massive amount to get through. I'm going to get into it pretty quick today, so I'll just wait another 30 seconds or so here. Hope you've all been well in your respective areas of this great land. You know, nice spring weather around the Darling Downs. Still a bit of cool stuff around, still single digits. Bit of crop rounds looking pretty good. Reports from further out west, it's looking good out that way as well. So trying to see if we got anyone. We got anyone here? We got two live. Just checking Facebook there, guys. All right. Three. We're doing well if we got three. I just thought that based off our conversations last week that we'd look to get into first focal plane versus second focal plane optics. Some people haven't experienced this, the difference between the two. Again, what we're aiming to do with this series is basically outline for the average Aussie bloke, shooter, lady, young person. We're just looking to try and frame it from a very simplistic point of view. We're not going to overcomplicate this. So this lens we're trying to put on this is all about you at the counter of your local optics store going through your options and weighing those things up. So that's the lens. And we're really talking about the typical recreational hunter, agricultural user. We're generally not here talking about the pointy end competition person or anything like that. So anyway, first focal plane versus second focal plane. A lot of people might say, I don't know anything about it. What is it? The real simple way to explain it is, I'll probably show you, is probably the easiest way. So I've got a little optic here, little Outback optic, when I can get that to focus, Endeavour 2.5. So that crosshair that you look through when you're looking down the optic, the crosshair is called a reticle. And that reticle sits inside another tube called an erector system. And that's the thing that really does the hard work when you're talking about optics. So that crosshair, we'll use that term, in a second focal plane optic sits about here. In a first focal plane optic, it sits about here. And you might ask yourself, you know, what difference does that make? Whether it sits here or whether it sits here. The simple thing gets back to what you see when you look down the tube of your rifle optic. So in a second focal plane optic, the one that's at the back near the eyepiece where the reticle will sit, when you change the magnification ring on your optic, again, we'll go here. When you change that on a second focal plane optic, what happens is nothing. You can't see a thing except for the zoom in on the target that you're looking for. On a first focal plane optic, if you were to zoom that ring in, what would happen is you would see that reticle or that crosshair would get larger, thicker. Best two words that I hear explained. It'll get larger and thicker. And it'll be in the same ratio relative to the magnification. Very, very skimmed over the top. Again, we're trying to keep it simple. That reticle position changes how you perceive the crosshair when you look through your optic. Now, that has advantages and they have some disadvantages. I'm going to start with second focal plane, because most people, if you're an avid outdoors person, you use your equipment several times a year, you probably know anything different but a second focal plane is what I should say. Most people will have a second focal plane and not even know it. So the second focal plane, few good pros here. And I just made some notes earlier when I was thinking about this. Pros, reticle remains the same size across all magnifications. Generally, you'll find second focal plane optics are reasonably affordable. Quite often with first focal plane optics, they can be more expensive. Not as a general rule anymore, because there's many manufacturers offering both, particularly in the higher end optics, at the same price. you'll find that they're excellent for close range shooting or close targets. And I'm going to use that close to mid, let's say before 600 meters, anything before 600 meters, a second focal plane optic used in a hunting or a culling environment will be really good for you. There's some cons. If you're someone that's into a few of the BDC reticles, which is bullet drop compensating reticles or reticles with holdovers, those generally actually mean something. So if you've looked through an optic and you've seen some little hashes or some dots like we've talked about in recent weeks, those generally represent a number. And we talked last week about mil versus MOA, and it doesn't matter what number it represents, but each one of those little hash marks might be, or subtensions might be 0.1 or 0.2 of a mil or an MOA or a tenth. There'll be an actual measurement. And that tells you how thick the line is and the distances between each one of those lines. Yeah, even if you've got a very simplistic one like the Outback Optics BDC, which basically has 2 or 3 lines, depending on which model you've got on there. If you've got that out to 600, that's a really good little tool to have for shooting further distance. What the problem becomes with those optics though is, and check your manufacturer, again, general knowledge, general information, check your manufacturer's guide when it comes to this next proposal here, that when you wind that optic up to say 10 power, let's say it's a 5 to 25 power optic. If you wound that optic to 10 power and it's second focal plane, and you want to accurately, repeatably use those hash marks or those subtensions to help you become a more accurate shooter, what you'll find is that the manufacturer will say, well, sorry, they aren't accurate at 10 power. It's only accurate at 25 power. And quite often, most of the optics I'm aware of generally are about 25, maximum magnification is what I should say. You have to have a second focal plane optic generally on a maximum magnification to have those little hash marks or subtensions actually be repeatable every single time. So the downside to that is you may not need your optic on 25 power to be able to make that shot, or it might be too big or blown up. There's a whole reasons there. That'll slow your shooting down because your field of view is now quite narrow because it's on 25, or you might have a 30 power or more. So there is some cons with that. The benefit is that an everyday person with a second focal plane reticle, generally doing general hunting, culling, it's perfect. It does everything we need to do. It's quick to use. It's easy to use. You don't have to worry about what magnification it's on. The reticle will stay the same as the day you bought it. When you look down there and you go, geez, I need some more field of view because I'm hunting late in the afternoon or under spotlight. So you'll wind the magnification back to 6 or 8 power to get that nice exit pupil that we spoke of a couple of weeks ago. Check back to that episode, I think 2 weeks ago, if you want to know about exit pupil and the maths behind that and how much light hits your eye. But that being said, the second focal plane reticle will remain the same, the thickness. So if you like a fine crosshair or a fine reticle, you'll maintain that the whole way through. So I think I've framed that enough. Let's have a quick yarn about first focal plane, and then we'll spin around, we'll sum them up again, and see if there's any. Drop a question. If anyone's got a question, I'm just going to look here to Facebook. Nothing, 0. We got 4 people. We're doing well today, 1 more than last time. So first focal plane optic. First focal plane optic, as I discussed before, it's in the front of the erector system. And what that means for us is that when you wind the magnification up on your optic, again, we're going to use that 5 to 25 power optic as an example. You've wound that optic to 10 power. All of a sudden, your crosshair, your reticle has zoomed in at the same ratio as it was on its minimum. So they're in relation to each other all the time. They're in the same plane as each other, which means you can reliably use hash marks, subtensions. Again, whatever your optic, if it has some of those hash marks or dots, whatever the size is, whether it's mil or MOA, you can accurately use that, whether it be at 100 meters or 1,000 meters. And to give you an example of this, and it's a real world example, I've got my trusty little Kestrel out here. If you don't have one and you like to try and pretend to shoot long range like I do, get yourself one. They're pretty good. This one's the 5700 Elite with the AP ballistics in it. So the Kestrel has all my information in it. We're assuming there's a target at, we're going to say 565 meters. Now, this particular profile I have saved in here is for my rim fire. So it's a 22. I'm shooting around that 1102 feet a second ammunition out of that. So it's saying, when I plumbed all that in, it does the calculation for me. It's saying that I need to hold up 34.86 mils. So that's quite a bit. And it's quite a bit. You can, not sure if you'll get to see that on there. And maybe if I turn the backlight on, it might. Let me do that again for you. So, as you can see there, I'm trying to, shoot a steel plate at 565 meters. I need to be able to dial up or use those hash marks, that particular measurement. And if I went to do that in my second focal plane optic, I may have to have that optic wound all the way up to 25 power. It may be a hot day, might be 35 degrees, 30 degrees outside, which means you 8 or 10 kilometre an hour wind blowing. We've got mirage, which we'll talk about another day. Mirage, that shimmy you see, coming off the road in summertime, you'll see that the waves come up. It looks like the road in front of you is moving. So in a scenario like that, you definitely would want to have your optic backed out so that mirage is not as heavy in the field of view what you're looking at. It sounds like it's a little bit technical, but it's not. Essentially, what I'm trying to say is that it doesn't matter then whether I've got it backed off, my optic backed off to 10 power again, so I can see the target at that 35 degree day shooting 565 meters with my rim fire. It doesn't matter because I can use those marks to my advantage, whether it's at 10 power or 25 power. If I've got my second focal plane optic, my standard hunting optic I'd use to chase deer or pig or whatever it happens to be that I'm trying to cull or feed the family with, that optic probably wouldn't work for me great in that scenario. It's probably something that at that sort of distance, trying to do that, the reticle's not going to have enough adjustment. I'm not going to be able to reliably range and hold and use my Kestrel. So it becomes very important that you have a look, like everything we're trying to communicate in this series of lives, is you really need to weigh up what's fit for purpose. Ignore the YouTube noise, ignore me, whatever. What I'm trying to say is that making sure you buy something fit for purpose for an average person, that is the things that are tried and true. First focal plane optics, accurate holds, ideal for long range or positional target shooting. They work really well with any kind of pop turrets. I find first focal plane are more common with mil radiance in the measurement, so that you find they go hand in hand with a lot of those systems and a lot of those reticles that match up. We call them Christmas trees because an average person looks through them and looks like a Christmas tree in front of you with all these little black lines. Some of the cons to that can be, though, and we think about that, think if you've got the optic on 5 power, so you got a first focal plane reticle, it's in the front, it changes the size of the reticle depending on the magnification. We've talked a lot about what happens at higher magnifications. The reticle, that crosshair blows out It looks really big, it looks really thick, but I'm able to repeatedly use those subtensions. Even if you just have a standard crosshair, there'll still be a slight subtension in there you could still use if it's a very traditional duplex style reticle. But if you go the opposite way on a first focal plane down to 5, the reticle gets really small, and so small and so fine for some people that it's impossible to tell the difference between one end of the reticle to the other, particularly if you've got a Christmas tree style. So what tends to happen is making an accurate shot at low power can become more challenging, because all of a sudden you've got an optic at 5 power with a crosshair, the center of the crosshair being so small that most people probably couldn't see it, or it all looks like, particularly if it's got hash marks in there, it all looks like a big blob in there. When it comes to be low light, again, we're culling. It's 9 o'clock at night on the back of the ute. We're culling some pigs, and you're trying to find that reticle because you bought an optic thinking it was going to do what you needed to do, but really you're discovering very quickly that night that it's not. You're trying to find the pig. The benefit is some of these optics in first focal plane, you can get in illumination. So the center of the crosshair will illuminate, and that may save you if you bought an optic that's first focal plane and you are trying to use it for more, I guess, precise hull work or even quicker shooting can be painful. So there is some cons with first focal plane, and it's normally low light, and whether that reticle works for you, whether it's too big or too small. So keep those things in mind and come back to it again. I see it in stores very regularly for the last several years, a bit of hype about first focal plane, and it's really come on the back of longer range steel target shooting, which I love. It's great. I really enjoy when I can get out there and do it, and I suggest you go and try it. However, I circle back to our episode a few weeks back when we talked about the long reach optic being a bit of a hybrid. And this is really what we were trying to achieve, is this conundrum that first focal plane and second focal plane presents. We were trying to build a hybrid between the two so that an average bloke, an average Joe, an average person can literally just go and do a little bit of everything, but do the main thing that they do and enjoy, being coal work or recreational hunting, do that job better than it does the rest. So that was the aim for our optic there. But to sum this all up in a nice, neat little bow, a little bit like our MIL versus MOA video from last week, at the end of the day, if you are doing the standard average thing, the same thing that your father and grandfather have done in that same way, I suggest you go for a second focal plane optic. It's probably the optic you already have. If that's all you're doing, second focal plane will probably be cheaper. You'll probably have more available choice. There'll be more stock available at a dealer as well as just the choice. And it's tried and true and it's trusted. You won't be able to go wrong. However, if you're someone, once again, that's going on a long-range adventure journey or want to dip your toe in the water, whether it's using a Kestrel and, buying high magnification optic and laying down on the ground shooting a steel target past 600 meters on your farm, I'd probably start to look at your first focal plane optic. And I'd partner that in the same conversation, backing up from last week, I'd partner that with our something in a MIL. Personally, I'd partner it with a MIL optic. So first focal plane MIL is what I would do. There is first focal plane MOA out there. Once again, doesn't matter which language you talk to. We covered that last week, as long as you understand the language that you are talking. And what I mean by that is MIL and MOA can be seen as two different languages. So as long as it's partnered with what you understand, it'll work great for you. So again, first focal plane generally works well for longer distance shooting, particularly when you start getting into understanding wind holds, elevation holds, dialing turrets. They work really well. Second focal plane, everything you've done for a long time, everything your father, your grandfather, your grandmother, that same standard type of optic use, second focal plane is the way to go, in my opinion, for that. This sport that we do, whether it's you do it professionally or for fun or recreationally, it's like golf. You can have one bang stick to do the job of a putter, another job, to do with a driver. And this is what an optic can be paired with. So if you've got a specific job that needs doing, when you go into the counter, think about that specific job. Think if that bang stick that you've got is going to be a jack of all trades in the ute all the time, and it's going to be the thing that I, when I get up in the morning, I take out and I go about the farm to do my work. If it's that one, I probably wouldn't recommend the first focal plane. However, again, if you're thinking about, no, this particular bang stick I'm setting up is going to be my competition bang stick, and I shoot F class, we'll touch on that. Something that you find with some long range shooters, in particular disciplines, F class is one of them. You'll see that a lot of those competitors use second focal plane optic to shoot long range. And a part of the reason is because the target actually has rings on it, and each one of those rings represents a set MOA amount, a set known number. So they can use a second focal plane reticle on high magnification with a very fine aiming point and just hold the rings of the target, if that makes sense, so that you've got multiple sizes of rings. I can just aim at a ring into the wing and have a fine aiming point still without having to go first focal plane. So there is some exceptions to the rule even when you do shoot long range. So again, it's about being fit for purpose, and this is what we're trying to communicate, some simple ways of checking. Every week in the last 3 or 4 weeks I've been doing this, we come back to the same thing, which is have a think about what you're doing. Here are some benefits and some features without getting into the high level of detail. And I'm sorry if that bogged down a little bit, this one, but without getting into the real technical aspect, remember, if you're at the counter, someone hands you an optic to have a look at, and you adjust the magnification ring and the reticle gets bigger, that is first focal plane. If you adjust the magnification ring and the reticle stays the same, it is a second focal plane. That's that. I hope that next week's going to be good for you guys. I've got a little bit on personally next week, so I'm not sure if we'll get to a live stream next Tuesday. We'll just see how it goes. I've got some stuff going on with little baby heart surgery, so we'll just see how that goes before we commit to next week, but I'm hoping we can do one next week. Yeah, I don't think we've got too much else to cover. I hope you all understood that, and I'm going to get out of here with our 4 viewers that are watching. Good night, hooroo, and stay focused.